What's up, ladies and gentlemen? You are listening to Campfire Catholicism. I am your host, Elton Jarvis. So glad to have you guys listening in to the show today, where we are going to be, well, you guys are listening to another Spontaneous Saturday. So thank you guys so much, where every single Saturday, or at least as many Saturdays as we can, we are going to be talking about something spontaneous, something that may seem totally random. The reality is even with the content of adventuring into Tolkienverse and Fairy Tale Fridays, that can get pretty heavy for me too sometimes, and just discussing about it and talking about it. So I also need these spontaneous Saturdays. They're really good for me as a content creator, to just talk about something and, re-jog and recharge my memory that way, even though I'm still talking to you guys, but it's still content for you. So, well, there you go. I believe the last episode we talked a bit about superheroes and superpowers. So that's fun. Today, we're going to be talking about something entirely different from superheroes and superpowers, but in some places in Canada, I know here in Alberta, in some places here, the snow is melting. Okay, and so even though winter is starting to try to swing at us a little bit more with some snow, but for the most part, the snow's going to melt, and it's melting, and so that is a little nudge, as you will, to start pulling out your barbecues and putting them onto the porch and having yourselves a nice cookout. Today we're going to be talking about food, but more specifically, we are going to be talking about meat. All you vegan listeners that are listening to this are going to be like, "Oh, he's talking about meat. I'm going to be clicking off this podcast." I apologize. I do love meat, although I do understand veganism as much as a non-vegan can understand veganism, and I also understand how vegans can get their nutritional intake per day and how they can even get a lot of protein per day. I totally understand that. I just love meat a lot. And yeah, anyways, maybe we'll talk about veganism later on in this show. Today I want to talk about meat, and I want to talk about a very important cut of meat that I'm sure most people love, and that is going to be steak. Now, before I even talk about steak, I used to cook growing up when I was around 9, 10, 11, 12, going on into high school, but it was only like basic stuff. Like I would only cook bacon, eggs, the classic for breakfast, and then I would have, well, your bowl of cereal every now and then, and I believe grilled cheese, and that was it. That was all I was able to make in the kitchen. And I remember in high school, I believe it was grade 11 or grade 12, my mom asked me if I could cook, and I said kind of. I knew what she meant by cooking. She didn't mean like eggs and bacon. She meant what would constitute to her as real food. Okay, so fish, meat, rice, all of that stuff per se. And so therefore I answered no. I was like, no, I don't know how to cook, Mama. My mom basically flat out told me, "You're going to die." And I believe the first thing that she ever taught me to cook was garlic rice, where it's basically the same fundamentals as fried rice, except you are using crushed garlic. And I believe you can even use onions with it as well. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't cooked it in a very, very long time. So that was like my first introduction to cooking, was her teaching me some of the basic stuff, and also teaching me how to use a rice cooker properly. I mean, every Asian knows how to cook rice properly in a rice cooker, right? And also I was able to translate that into cooking it in a pot when you wouldn't have a rice cooker. I'm telling you, the first knuckle in the middle finger works every time. Perfect measurement. You don't need a measuring cup. You just need the first knuckle in your middle finger. It actually works. Trust me, ladies and gentlemen, it really does work. But over the course of my culinary career, I'm not a I'm not a culinary expert. If anything, I hope to just be a home cook where I can support my, God willing, my children and my wife in the kitchen and feed them. That is only what I aspire towards. But if I can do it in a very good and filling way, then I would want to optimize that, because that could be an act of charity onto them. Let's put it that way. And so when I also had to, when I lived as a missionary in Ottawa with Net Canada, because I was on Net Canada staff, I was a supervisor at one point, I also had to cook as well. And I didn't think I did too bad cooking. They did like, or at least the guys that I lived with, they did like the food, so there is that. But I realized when I'm shouting out my girlfriend Teresa again on this podcast, I seem to be doing that a lot recently, perhaps because I miss her. Anyways, Teresa really loves food and she loves meat, and I knew that pretty early on, and so I wanted to impress her, and so I needed to get better at cooking certain things as well. And so today in this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 steaks from, I guess you could say, beginning, intermediate to advanced. Especially all of you men that are watching this right now that really want to impress the one that you are with, especially if they love meat. Perhaps this is the episode for you. But I am going to be talking about one beginner way that we can cook a steak cut, the second an intermediate way, and the third an advanced way. Okay, let's go to the beginner way. So the beginner way that you can cook a steak, very, very simple. So take your steak cut out, usually 10-15 minutes outside of the fridge, so that way the steak can get up to room temperature. That is very, very important, because you don't want a cold centered steak, and it can also mess with the temperatures and the fluctuations and whatnot. I think I'm being technical on those terms. I am not entirely sure. Now, when you take it out of the fridge and then you've left it for like 15 minutes, you want to season it liberally with salt and pepper. Season. Works every time. So season it on one side, season it on the other. Even mop up the seasoning that is around your cutting board. Do that. Steak tastes better with seasoning. So salt and pepper. And then you want a hot pan. I usually use a nonstick pan. I'm sure you can use a cast iron too, but if you just have a nonstick is fine. Have your nonstick pan, put it on the most of us here have induction stoves, but if you guys have gas stoves, well, God bless you, because gas stoves are amazing. But put it on your stove, turn the stove to medium to high. You want the pan very, very hot, almost as if it is smoking. And the reason why you want it hot is because we are going to be searing the steak and not boiling it. Okay, so wait till that pan gets nice and hot. Once it's hot enough, get your olive oil and put about a tablespoon of olive oil in the pan. And then as soon as that happens, you want to just like feel the pan, feel how hot it is, feel the heat radiating from it. And then you take the steak, and whenever you put steak in a pan, always lay it away from you. That way the oil doesn't splash up and hit you in the eye. Always lay away. I'm pretty sure that's a common sense thing, but just in case you don't know, always lay the steak away from you. And so take the steak, you lay it away from you, and you should hear a sizzling, a very aggressive sizzling noise in the pan. If you hear that, then good. You are now searing your steak. And depending on how you like your steak, the temperature preference is your choice. I personally like a medium rare steak. Even medium rare going to rare. I love a juicy steak, a very, very juicy steak. Now, Teresa's more of a medium rare to medium well type of woman. Okay, she likes her steak still juicy, but a little bit more done than I like mine. Okay, and so you can look up how to do temperature preferences on the internet. But if you're not entirely confident, and especially if you have a really, really thick cut piece of steak, You can use a meat thermometer. That also works as well. And I can't recall off the top of my head what temperature constitutes which temperature preference, but you can probably search that up as well. Now, once you sear that one side of the steak, you want to sear the other side as well. And there's two ways that we can do this. You can flip the steaks constantly, or you don't move it at all. I find that either option works. I personally am a person that doesn't move the steaks very much in the pan. I usually sear it and I let it sit there for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then I flip it over for another 2 to 3 minutes, and then it's usually done by then. So yeah, sear one side of the steak, flip it over, you're searing the other side. Now, as that is happening, as you're searing the other side, you want to get a few ingredients ready. And usually you want to like get them ready beforehand, but just get them ready. Crush a clove of garlic. And how you can do that very simply is take a clove of garlic out, get your knife, put it on top of the clove, smash it. Not obviously, don't smash it too hard, just smash it enough where you can lightly crush the garlic clove. You could even keep the peel in there as well. And throw it in the pan. And you can, depending on how many steaks you have in the pan, it's your choice. Do it around 2 to 3 cloves. As you could tell right now, I'm not really a person that deals with recipes when it comes to cooking. Baking is a totally different subject. I am more, I guess, conservative and more measurative when it comes to baking. With cooking, I'm more liberal. It's more on the feeling and it's more on the tasting. Recipes are there as a guideline, but cooking, I think, is a philosophy, as the great Marco Pierre White says. If anybody knows who Marco Pierre White is, he's Gordon Ramsay's mentor in the kitchen. Anyways, I'm already at 12 minutes and I'm trying to keep this at 20 minutes long. Now, once you have seared both sides of your steak, or actually really more technically, as you are searing the second side of your steak, you want to put your garlic in, the crushed garlic, as I mentioned before. Get rosemary or get thyme. Either work. Just pick any of it. Thyme or rosemary, throw that in the pan as well. And then you want to get butter. Okay, butter gives it a nice nutty and aromatic flavor, and butter is a good carrier for the rosemary / thyme and the garlic that is in the pan. Okay? And also the reason why we put the butter in now versus when we put the butter in before, as you realize, we've put olive oil before. Olive oil helps the butter not burn as quick. Okay, so once you put the garlic and the rosemary in, or thyme, then you put your butter in. As you put the butter in, you want to be basting the steak with the butter. That way, the flavored butter of the garlic and the rosemary, thyme, that is seeping into the meat as it is cooking. So keep basting it, and baste it for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. Again, understanding what temperature preference you want to cook your steak at. And then when that is done, once you think the steak is ready, you take out the steak from the pan. And this part is very crucial, and this is the same for every single other recipe. You want to have the steak rest for about as long as you've cooked it for. The longer it rests, the juicier it is. And what's happening is when you are resting the meat, you're allowing the meat to relax, and you're allowing all of the juices to seep back into the meat instead of cutting the meat open. A lot of people cut their steaks way too quick. And as soon as they cut the meat, then the juice starts to fill out. And that's where all the flavor is. The flavor is spilling out. You don't want to do that. You want to take the steak out, rest it for about 5 to 10 minutes, let the juices seep back into the meat. Then you can cut the steak and cut against the grain, and then you can present it however way you want it. Okay, so that is the beginner way of cooking the steak. Now, the intermediate way of cooking a steak. You're basically going to do the same as the first way of cooking a steak. As the steak is resting, though, here's an extra twist with an extra few ingredients. If any of you guys have, so use that same pan. You can give it a quick wipe, but you can use the same pan and get Worcestershire sauce. You can find it in any grocery store. So get Worcestershire sauce, pour the Worcestershire sauce in the pan, and allow it to reduce. You might even have to let the pan cool a little bit, and that is fine depending on how hot it was. But it still should be somewhat hot, because what you're doing is you're pouring the Worcestershire sauce in. Again, you can find a recipe on how to do this. I don't know how many cups I would put in. Just pour it in and allow the Worcestershire sauce to reduce by half. Okay, and the reason why it is reducing is it is allowing those flavors to intensify as it is in the pan. Okay, so allow the Worcestershire sauce to reduce, and then as it's reduced a bit by about half, so pour your Worcestershire sauce in, wait till it gets about half full, then you pour in heavy cream. Okay, and the cream is there for, again, texture. The cream is texturous. It's also there for color. Okay, and a good guideline on how you want your cream sauce done with your steak is the lighter the cream, the weaker the sauce is. The darker the cream, the more heavier and the more rich the sauce is. You can have it to about a very dark caramel color to the color of, say, a double-double that you can get from Tim Hortons. So there are many ways, and basically what you're doing is you're creating a cream steak is really what you're doing. So that's your cream-based sauce. Once the cream-based sauce is done that way, you can add a beef stock cube. Knorr is really good for this. You can add a beef stock cube, or you can even season it with salt and pepper. Season the sauce. Once the sauce has reduced a little bit, then you put those resting steaks back into the sauce and let it finish in there for about a minute, 2 minutes. And then you can turn that stove off and leave the steaks in the pan there. And to finish it all off, you can get a sprig of rosemary, sprig of thyme, and then just dip it in the sauce. And that way, it also carries the rosemary and the thyme flavor that is in the steak sauce. So that cream steak, that is the intermediate way of cooking the steak. Same thing as the first, except you're just adding another step. Okay? Now, here is the advanced way of cooking a steak. All right? So, now this recipe usually works with a nice steak fillet. So you get a fillet of steak, and usually that is a round cylinder piece of steak, although I would like to think it can work for other steak cuts as well. But get a nice fillet chunk of steak, and then you can slice it. Okay, slice it to round steak portions that are thick. It's hard to explain, but they are thick and they are round. Okay, so same thing as the first two. You want to sear them. Well, first you want to season them. Sear them on both sides, but the searing is going to be quicker. The only reason why you are searing the steaks in the pan with this recipe is you are wanting to lock in the flavors, and it's actually going to finish off in the oven. All right, so step 1, cut the steak. Step 2, season it. Step 3, hot pan, olive oil. Put the steaks in only for a quick sear. You're not cooking the steak in the pan. You are just searing it for color and to lock in those flavors. Sear it on both sides. Don't have to worry about the butter, the garlic, and the rosemary or the thyme. That's going to be coming. You want to take those steaks out of the pan and allow them to rest a little bit, but what you're going to have... Now, I don't know if you can substitute this technique with any other technique, but for me, and this is very important, if any of you guys buy a lot of butter, save your butter paper for this recipe. You're going to get your butter paper. You're going to put that steak in the butter paper that is buttered. It has the flavor there. Then you take the crushed clove of garlic, put that in the butter paper. Take the thyme, rosemary, put that in the butter paper as well, and then you close the butter paper around the steak. And then you finish that off in the oven for about, again, 5-6 minutes, depending again on how you want your steak's temperature preference. Again, this is also why a meat thermometer is a good idea if you can't check the temperature of your meat. So, after searing the steak, put it in butter paper, put it in. And this is where it gets exciting. As it is cooking in the oven, finishing cooking, you create a steak wine reduction chocolate sauce. And I did this sauce with Teresa a while back, and she enjoyed it. And I was pretty proud of myself. This is how you do it, okay? You get your saucepan. Again, a little bit of olive oil, put that in, but then you put really good bacon or pancetta. Pancetta is a I guess you could say it's an Italian bacon. You get pancetta or you get some really good bacon. You throw that in the pan, mix it all up, season it, salt and pepper. Be generous with that. Well, be more generous with the pepper than the salt because bacon's already naturally salty. Sear that a bit. And then as you are searing that, sear it with shallots or any type of onion, but shallots are preferred. Shallots bring out a natural sweetness, I find. So sear your shallots in with the bacon or any type of sweet onion. And then you throw in a bay leaf. Throw in a few peppercorns, and then pour in your red wine. It can be any red wine. It doesn't have to be an expensive red wine. Pour in a red wine, and then you reduce the red wine to about half until it gets a bit thicker. After it is reduced a bit, you sift the sauce through a sifter into another pan, and then you chuck out, this is the part that might be upsetting, you chuck out the bacon that was in it and you chuck out everything else, and so you're left with the sauce. Let the sauce cool by just a little bit, and then you whisk in dark chocolate. Only a little bit of dark chocolate. There was a time that I put too much in and I thought the sauce was too strong. But Teresa and her family loved it, so I'm glad. I thought it was too strong. That's okay, though. Take in a little bit of dark chocolate, and then you whisk it into the sauce. And so you end up getting a red wine, creamy chocolate sauce that you can use to drizzle over the fillet steaks when they're done cooking. And lastly, after you whisk in the chocolate sauce, get a sprig of rosemary or thyme, and then you just dip it in the sauce for about 2 to 3 minutes, and let the rosemary just flavor and make the sauce aromatic. Can you tell I'm a good cook? I'm stumbling over my words. After the sauce is done, you take out the steak fillets that are cooking in the oven, have them rest, slice into them, and then pour the chocolate sauce over the steak. Might even do a video on these 3 recipes later on in my YouTube channel, but I do hope that these 3 recipes can please your loved one if they really love meat. And so thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Please continue to look at other episodes that we have here on Spotify if you are listening to Spotify, or if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, that's there as well. You can also find them on YouTube. I'm also on YouTube, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That would be a great help. And follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. You have been listening to Campfire Catholicism. Now, why don't you cook yourselves a great steak? Take care.